The wind carried no mercy that December night in 1886. It tore across the Wyoming high country like a living thing bent on erasing every human mark from the land. Thomas Brennan stood at his cabin window, watching the white curtain devour the world beyond his fence line. The glass fogged with each breath. 32 winters he'd seen in this territory, and this storm felt different, hungrier. He turned from the window and stirred the stew bubbling over his fireplace. The cabin held the same silence it had held for the past 7 years since his mother passed. That silence used to feel like peace. Lately it pressed against his chest like a hand. The wind screamed louder. Then beneath it something else. A sound that didn't belong to the storm. Thomas moved to the door, pressing his ear against the wood. There it was again. Not wind, not the barn door he'd secured twice before sundown. This was weaker. Human. He threw the bolt and wrenched the door open. The cold hit him like a fist. Snow swirled into the cabin, and there on his threshold a shape, dark against white, collapsed. Unmoving. Thomas dropped to his knees. A woman. Apache from the beadwork still clinging to her torn dress. Her black hair was frozen in clumps, her lips the color of old bruises. He pressed 2 fingers to her throat. A pulse. Faint. Failing. No questions. Not yet. He gathered her into his arms, and her head lolled against his chest. Light as kindling, cold as the dead. Inside, he kicked the door shut against the howling and carried her to the fireplace. Her clothes, what remained of them, were soaked through and stiff with ice. His hands moved with purpose, pulling off her ruined coat, unlacing boots that had holes worn through the soles. Dark welts covered her shoulders. Rope burns circled her wrists. Bruises flowered across her ribs in shades of purple and yellow. Someone had hurt this woman. Recently, deliberately. Thomas grabbed his mother's old nightdress from the trunk and his thickest wool blanket. He set them beside her and turned his back. Behind him, the rustle of fabric, the soft gasp of someone in pain trying to stay silent. Minutes passed. The fire crackled. His jaw clenched so tight his teeth ached. Her voice came hoarse and threadbare. "You can turn around now." She sat wrapped in the blanket, the nightdress hanging loose on her frame. In the firelight, he saw her face clearly for the first time. High cheekbones, eyes like deep water. Young, maybe 28, but aged by something far older than years. Thomas knelt and ladled stew into a bowl. He held it out to her. She stared at it for a long moment, as if kindness itself was a trap. Then her trembling hands took the bowl. She ate in small sips, careful, dignified, even in desperation. He watched her from across the fire, saying nothing. Questions could wait. Right now, she needed heat and food and to know she was safe. When she finished, she set the bowl down and met his eyes. The firelight caught in hers, wary, wild, ready to run. Thomas spoke first. "I'm Thomas Brennan. This is my land, my cabin. You're safe here." She studied him, looking for lies, for cruelty, for whatever had marked the other men in her life. Finally, she nodded once. Iyanna Stormwind. The name settled in the space between them. Thomas added another log to the fire. Outside, the wind hammered at the walls. "Storm's not stopping tonight. You can sleep by the fire. I'll take the other room." Iyanna's eyes narrowed. "Why?" "Because you need rest. Men don't do things without wanting something back." The words hit harder than she probably meant them. Thomas sat back on his heels. His mother's voice echoed in his memory, clear as yesterday. "Wait for someone worthy, Thomas. Wait for a woman who makes you better than you are. Don't waste yourself on anything less." He'd kept that promise for 32 years. The whole territory knew him as the bachelor rancher who never so much as looked at the saloon girls. Some called him saint. Most called him fool. Thomas met Iyanna's gaze. "I don't want anything from you except to see you alive come morning, that's all." Something shifted in her expression. Not trust, not yet, but maybe the beginning of it. She pulled the blanket tighter. "They'll come looking for me." "Who?" Her jaw worked, words trying to form around old fear. "Victor Calloway. He owns the Lucky Star Saloon in Red Creek, and half the businesses around it." Thomas knew the name. Every rancher within 50 miles knew Victor Calloway, a man who'd come west 15 years ago with nothing and built an empire through means polite society didn't examine too closely. "What does he want with you?" Iyanna's laugh came bitter and broken. What men like him always want. Control. I worked in his saloon, serving drinks, nothing more. My husband died 2 years ago. I needed money. Victor offered work. She paused and Thomas saw her hands tighten on the blanket. Then he decided I should do more than serve drinks. I refused. He said I owed him for the room and board for the clothes he gave me. He gave me until Christmas Eve to agree, or he'd take what he wanted anyway. The fire popped. Sparks rose toward the chimney. Thomas felt something cold settle in his gut. You ran. 3 days ago, I've been hiding in the hills. The storm, I thought I could wait it out in a cave, but the cold. Her voice trailed off. I saw your light. I didn't think you'd open the door. Thomas stood and walked to the window. The storm had worsened. Snow piled against the fence posts. Nothing moved out there except the wind and the white. You're safe here, he said again. Whatever happens, you're safe here. Ayanna didn't respond. When he turned back, she'd curled onto her side by the fire, the blanket cocooned around her. Her breathing had already slowed toward sleep. Thomas watched her for a moment, this stranger who'd stumbled into his carefully ordered solitude. Then he went to his room and lay down on the bed his father had built 40 years ago. Sleep didn't come easy. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, something had shifted. The silence didn't feel the same anymore. Dawn broke gray and reluctant. Thomas woke to the smell of coffee and found Ayanna sitting at his table, the blanket still wrapped around her shoulders. She'd made breakfast from the supplies she'd found, eggs, bread, toasted over the fire, the coffee strong and black. She looked up when he entered. You had food. I used some. I hope that's acceptable. More than acceptable. Thomas sat across from her. The welts on her shoulders were more visible now. Some had opened during the night, blood seeping through the nightdress. Those wounds need tending. I've had worse. That's not an answer. She met his eyes over the coffee cup. Something in her expression had changed overnight. Less feral, still guarded but curious now. Why did you really let me in? Her tone was direct, unflinching. The truth. Thomas considered lying, then decided she deserved honesty. My mother raised me to believe that how you treat someone when they're helpless tells you everything about who you are. You were dying on my porch. The man I want to be doesn't let that happen. Ayanna set down her cup. Your mother sounds like she was a good woman. The best I've known. The words came quiet. 7 years dead and the grief still had edges. She made me promise something before she passed. That I wouldn't give myself to anyone unless I was certain. That I'd wait for someone who'd make me better than I am. And have you found someone like that? No, Ayanna tilted her head. 32 years old and never been with a woman. That's what they say about you in town. Thomas Brennan, the virgin rancher. Some say you're broken. Others say you're holy. Heat crept up Thomas's neck, but he didn't look away. I'm neither. I'm just a man who keeps his promises. Even when keeping them leaves you alone. The question hung between them. Outside, the storm had gentled to steady snowfall. The world beyond the window was white and still and empty. Thomas stood and moved to the stove. Your wounds, let me clean them properly. Infection in this cold will kill you as sure as freezing. Ayanna hesitated, then nodded. She turned her back to him and let the blanket fall to her waist. The welts were worse than he'd thought, deep lash marks that crossed her shoulders in parallel lines. Someone had used a whip, multiple times. Thomas wet a cloth in warm water and began to clean the wounds. She flinched at the first touch but didn't cry out. He worked in silence, careful and methodical. When he'd cleaned them all, he applied salve. His mother had taught him to make from pine resin and herbs. Victor did this. One of his men, under Victor's orders, a lesson about refusing. Thomas's hands stilled. Men who do this aren't men. They're something less. Yet they're the ones with all the power. He finished bandaging the worst wounds. Not all power, not yet. Ayanna pulled the blanket back up and turned to face him. Her eyes searched his face with an intensity that felt like being weighed. You're different from other white men I've known. How so? You look at me like I'm a person, not property, not a curiosity, not something to use or pity, just a person. The words settled into Thomas like seeds finding soil. He'd never thought about it before, how he looked at people. He just saw them. Ayanna was Apache, yes, but that was no more defining than him being Irish was defining. What mattered was that she was hurt, and needed help. You are a person, he said simply. What else would you be? Ayana's expression softened for the first time. You really don't know, do you? How rare that is. Before Thomas could respond, the sound of hoofbeats cut through the morning quiet. Multiple horses, moving fast. Ayana's face went white. They found me. Thomas moved to the window. 3 riders emerged from the tree line, dark shapes against the snow. Even from a distance, he recognized the lead horse, a massive black gelding that belonged to only one man in the territory. Victor Calloway had come himself. Thomas grabbed his rifle from above the door. Stay inside. Don't come out no matter what you hear. Thomas, stay inside. He stepped onto the porch, rifle held loose at his side. The 3 riders reined up 20 feet from his cabin. Victor Calloway sat his horse like a man born to command. 50 years old, silver hair, swept back eyes the color of winter ice. Handsome in the way predators are handsome, all sharp lines and controlled danger. The 2 men flanking him were younger, harder. Guns visible on their hips. Victor's smile showed too many teeth. Thomas Brennan, good morning. Victor? Cold day for visitors, isn't it? Victor's gaze swept the cabin, the porch lingering on the front door. Yet here we are, looking for someone. An Apache woman. Young, black hair. She ran from my establishment 3 nights ago. Owe me considerable money. I have reason to believe she might have sought shelter here. Thomas kept his voice level. I don't know what you're talking about. Victor's smile widened. Now, Thomas, we've known each other, 7 years since your mother passed, God rest her soul. She was a fine woman, charitable, would be disappointed to see her son lying to his neighbors. I'm not lying, and you're not my neighbor. Your land is 10 miles south. One of Victor's men shifted in his saddle hand, drifting toward his gun. Victor raised a hand and the man stilled. You're right, of course. Not neighbors, but business associates in a way. I buy my beef from you. Good prices, fair terms. Wouldn't want that relationship to sour. The threat wrapped in courtesy. Thomas had seen this before, Victor's way of bending people without ever raising his voice. The woman who sought shelter here last night was dying in a snowstorm. I gave her food and warmth. That's not a crime. Victor's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. So she is here. She was. Don't know if she still is. Storm was bad. People make their own choices come morning. Interesting. Victor leaned forward in his saddle. See, Thomas, this woman, Ayana, she signed a contract. Room board employment, all spelled out legal. She broke that contract, ran owing me 3 months' wages plus what I spent keeping her alive. In the eyes of the law, she's little better than a thief. In the eyes of the law, Thomas said slowly, a contract signed under duress isn't worth the paper it's written on. Victor's smile vanished. You calling me a liar? I'm saying a woman doesn't run into a snowstorm unless what she's running from is worse than freezing to death. The silence stretched. Snow fell soft between them. Victor's horse stamped and snorted steam into the cold air. Finally, Victor straightened. You're making a mistake, Thomas. A costly one. Men who interfere in my business tend to find themselves without friends, without credit at the banks, without buyers for their cattle. This is a hard land. Gets harder when you stand alone. Thomas raised the rifle just enough to be noticed. I'm not standing alone. I'm standing on my property, and you're trespassing. One of Victor's men's hand moved toward his gun. Victor stopped him with a look. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Victor turned his horse. You're a fool, Brennan. A fool keeping his mother's silly promise while the world moves on. That Apache whore isn't worth your ruin. When you realize that, come find me. I'll give you one chance to return her and walk away from this. He spurred his horse and the 3 riders wheeled away, galloping back toward the tree line. Thomas stood on the porch until they disappeared, rifle still ready. Only when the last sound of hoofbeats faded did he lower the weapon. Behind him, the cabin door opened. Ayana stood there, pale as snow. You just made an enemy of the most dangerous man in the territory. Thomas looked at her, this woman he'd known less than 24 hours. Her face was beautiful and fierce and terrified all at once. I know, he said. He'll destroy you. Maybe. Then why did you do it? Thomas met her eyes. Because it was right, and because you're not his property. You're not anyone's property. Ayana's throat worked. Something in her expression cracked open, not breaking, but opening, like a door long sealed, finally letting in light. She stepped onto the porch beside him. The snow fell soft around them. Her hand found his cold fingers wrapping around calloused palm. No one has ever stood up for me like that. Thomas squeezed her hand gently. Then you've known the wrong men. They stood together watching the white world. The storm had passed, but the cold remained, and Thomas knew in his bones that Victor Calloway would return. Men like him always did. But right now, in this moment, there was only the silence of new snow and the warmth of another person's hand in his. Something had changed between them. Something neither had words for yet. Something that felt dangerous and necessary as breathing. Inside the cabin, the fire still burned. Outside, their breath misted white in the frozen air. And somewhere beyond the tree line, Victor Calloway was already planning his next move. The war for Ayana Stormwind had just begun. The second night, the temperature dropped so low the windows frosted over from inside. Thomas kept the fire roaring, burning through wood faster than he liked, but Ayana still shivered under her blanket. He'd given her his warmest coat, his mother's old wool socks, another quilt from the trunk. Nothing seemed enough. Around midnight, her teeth started chattering so hard he heard them from across the room. Thomas made a decision. He moved his bedding next to the fireplace close to where she lay. "What are you doing?" "Keeping you from freezing. It's colder tonight. Fire alone won't be enough." Ayana watched him spread the blankets. People always say things, doesn't make them true. He lay down on his makeshift bed, staying a respectful distance away. The fire crackled between them in the frozen night. For a while, neither spoke. Then Ayana's voice came soft in the darkness. "Thomas." "Yes. Thank you." "For not asking." "Asking what?" "The question all men ask, whether I deserve what happened, whether I did something to make Victor think I wanted his attention, whether I'm lying about the bruises." Thomas turned his head to look at her across the firelight. Her eyes were open, reflecting flames. "Those aren't questions. Those are accusations dressed up as curiosity. I know what I saw. That's enough. You're a strange man, Thomas Brennan. So I've been told. The whole territory knows you. The rancher who's never touched a woman, never been to the saloon, lives alone by choice." She paused. "Why do you really keep that promise? Your mother's been gone 7 years. No one would fault you for moving on." Thomas stared at the ceiling beams his father had cut from trees on this very land. How to explain something he barely understood himself? "When my father died, I was 14. He was a good man, a strong man, but he had a weakness. Whiskey. One night he rode home drunk from town, fell off his horse, broke his neck in a ditch. My mother found him at dawn, frozen solid. The memory was old, but it still had teeth. She never blamed him, never spoke ill of him. But she pulled me aside that day and made me swear something, that I'd never let liquor or lust make my decisions, that I'd stay clear-headed and wait for something real, something that mattered." He rolled onto his side to face her. "I've kept that promise because breaking it would mean my father's death taught me nothing. Would mean I'm just as weak as he was. And I can't," his voice caught, "I can't be that man." Ayana was silent for a long moment. Then she shifted closer, closing the distance between them. Not touching, but near enough that he could feel her warmth. "You're not weak, Thomas. You're the strongest man I've met. Strong enough to keep a promise that cost you everything." "It hasn't cost me everything." "Hasn't it? You're 32 years old, and you live alone on this mountain. No wife, no children, no one to share your life with, all because of a vow you made when you were a boy." Thomas looked at her. Firelight played across her face, softening the hard edges fear had carved there. "Maybe," he said quietly, "I was waiting for the right reason to break it." The words hung between them like snow suspended in air before it falls. Ayana's breath caught. Her eyes searched his face. "Don't say things like that." "Why not?" "Because I'm not. I can't be." She struggled with the words. "Thomas, I'm broken. Men have taken so much from me. My husband, my dignity, my belief that anything good exists in this world. I can't be the reason you break a promise to your mother. I can't be that important." Thomas reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. His hands settled over hers. What if you already are? Ayana's eyes filled. Not quite tears, something deeper. Something like grief meeting hope and not knowing which to trust. You barely know me. I know you're brave. I know you'd rather die in a snowstorm than let a man own you. I know you tried to make me breakfast to repay a kindness no one asked you to repay. I know that when you look at me, you see a person, not a fool. He squeezed her hand gently. That's more than I've gotten from anyone in 7 years. She closed her eyes. This is madness. Maybe. Victor will come back. He'll bring more men. I know. You could still give me up. Tell him I ran. You'd be safe. Thomas pulled his hand back. Is that what you want? Ayana opened her eyes. In the firelight, they were black as night and just as deep. No, she whispered. God help me, no. The confession seemed to cost her everything. She turned away, curling into herself. Thomas lay back down, giving her space. But inside his chest, something had taken root. Something dangerous and precious. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, two people who'd been alone for too long lay awake by the fire, listening to each other breathe. Morning came harsh and bright. Thomas woke to find Ayana already up, dressed in her own clothes, dried and mended as best she could manage. She stood at the window, staring out at the white expanse. What are you thinking? Thomas asked, pulling on his boots. That I can't hide here forever. That eventually I have to face what's coming. Thomas joined her at the window. Not alone, you don't. You can't fight Victor Calloway. No one can. He owns the law in Red Creek. The sheriff, half the judges, men who've tried to stand against him end up broken or dead. Then we don't fight him in Red Creek. We go to the territorial marshal. Ayana laughed bitterly. And tell him that I ran from a contract I signed, that I claim Victor tried to assault me, but have no proof, Thomas. I'm Apache. In the eyes of the law, I barely exist. Victor is a respected businessman. Who do you think they'll believe? The truth of her words hit hard. Thomas had seen it before, how the law bent differently depending on who you were, how justice was a luxury for those who could afford it. Then we find proof. Someone in Victor's organization who will testify. Papers that show the contract was fraudulent. Something. There is no proof. Victor is too careful, and his men are too loyal or too scared to talk. Thomas turned from the window and began pulling on his coat. Then I'll pay off your debt. Whatever you owe him, I'll cover it. Clear the books and end this. Ayana grabbed his arm. No, I won't let you bankrupt yourself for me. It's not bankruptcy, Tesh. It's stop. Her grip tightened. You're talking about throwing away everything your parents built. This ranch, your livelihood, your future, all for a woman you met 3 days ago. That's not noble, Thomas. That's suicide. He met her fierce gaze. What's the point of having a future if I spend it alone and ashamed I have money saved? Not much, but enough. If buying your freedom costs me a few hard years, then that's a price I'm willing to pay. Why? The word came out raw. Why would you do this for me? Thomas cupped her face in his rough hands. Because when I look at you, I don't see someone broken. I see someone fighting. And I think maybe together we're stronger than either of us is alone. Ayana trembled. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. Thomas, her voice broke. There's something I haven't told you. Something that changes everything. Dread settled in his stomach. Tell me. She pulled away from him, wrapping her arms around herself. The reason Victor wanted me to work upstairs, the reason he was so insistent, it's because... She took a shuddering breath. I'm pregnant. The words hit like a physical blow. Thomas steadied himself against the window frame. Ayana continued, voice hollow. It happened 3 months ago. Victor invited me to his private rooms to discuss my debt. I thought it was just a meeting. He forced himself on me. When I fought back, his men held me down. When it was over, he said I'd enjoyed it, that I'd wanted it, that if I told anyone, he'd make sure everyone knew I was a whore who seduced him for money. She turned to face him, and Thomas saw something shatter in her expression. I found out I was pregnant 6 weeks ago. That's when Victor told me I had to start working upstairs or he'd throw me out with nothing. Said no one would believe a pregnant Apache woman's word against his. He was right. No one did believe me. I told 3 people, 3 women I thought were friends, and they all said I must have done something to encourage him. Tears streaked her face, now hot and angry. So I ran into the storm, preferring death to... She couldn't finish. Thomas stood frozen. Information crashed through him like an avalanche. Pregnant, raped, carrying her rapist's child. Every instinct screamed that this changed everything, that this was too much, that he should what, turn her out, hand her over to Victor. Let her die. He moved across the cabin in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. She stiffened, then collapsed against him, sobs tearing from her throat. I'm sorry, she gasped. I'm so sorry. I should have told you before you said those things. Now you know. Now you know I'm not worth... Stop. Thomas held her tighter. You are worth everything. What happened to you wasn't your fault. None of it was your fault. But the baby is innocent, just like you. Ayanna pulled back to look at him. You can't possibly want this. Want me. Not like this. Not carrying another man's Victor's... Thomas wiped tears from her cheeks with his thumbs. I want you safe. I want you free. I want Victor Calloway to never touch you again. Everything else will figure it out. You don't understand what you're saying. If you keep protecting me, you're not just defying the Victor. You're taking responsibility for his child. The whole territory will know. They'll call you a fool. They'll say you're raising your enemy's bastard. They'll let them talk. Thomas's voice came firm, final. I've spent 32 years living for other people's opinions, for my mother's promise, for the territory's expectations. Maybe it's time I lived for something real. Ayanna shook her head. This is insane. You barely know me. I know enough. You could still turn me away, give me some money and send me north. No one would blame you. Thomas tilted her chin up. I would blame me. Thomas, Ayanna. He'd never said her name like this before, like it mattered. When my mother was dying, she told me something I didn't understand until now. She said I'd know the right person because she'd scare me. Because real love is terrifying. It asks you to give up everything you thought you knew about yourself and become someone new. He searched her eyes. You terrify me. Because being with you means becoming a different man than I planned to be. And I think that's exactly what I need. Ayanna stared at him. Outside, the sun climbed higher, turning the snow blindingly bright. Inside, 2 people stood on the edge of a decision that would define the rest of their lives. Finally, Ayanna whispered, if you do this, if you really do this, there's no going back. Victor will destroy you. Then let him try. She reached up and touched his face, fingers gentle against rough stubble. Why give me one good reason why you'd risk everything for me? Thomas caught her hand and pressed it against his chest, where his heart hammered like a war drum. Because the night you knocked on my door, I was standing at that window thinking about how empty this cabin felt. How empty my whole life felt. And then there you were, half frozen, terrified, desperate, and you looked at me like I could be something more than I am. Like I could be a man worth trusting. His voice dropped low. I want to be that man, Ayanna. I want to be the man you saw when you knocked on my door. The tears came again, but different now, softer, something like hope breaking through decades of despair. You already are, she breathed. Then she kissed him, quick and tentative, like the testing whether salvation was real. Thomas froze for a heartbeat, then kissed her back, gentle, reverent, terrified he'd somehow hurt her more. When they broke apart, Ayanna laughed through her tears. Your mother's promise was preparing me for this, for you. She'd think you were crazy. She'd think I was finally awake. Outside, a crow cawed harsh in the silence. The sound brought them both back to reality. Victor was still out there. The territory still held its prejudices. The child still grew in Ayanna's belly. None of the hard things had changed, but now they'd face them together. Thomas stepped back and squared his shoulders. We need a plan. What kind of plan? The kind that keeps you alive and free. First, we establish that you're under my protection. Anyone who wants you has to go through me. That won't stop Victor. No, but it'll slow him down. Buy us time to find leverage, something that makes it more costly for him to pursue this than to let you go. Ayanna shook her head. There is no leverage against a man like Victor. Everyone has weaknesses. We just have to find his. Before Ayanna could respond, the sound of horses cut through the morning. Multiple riders again, more than before. Thomas grabbed his rifle. Stay inside. Thomas, please. He stepped onto the porch. 6 riders this time. Victor at the head, the winter taunted, turning his silver hair to ice. But these men were different from before, harder professional. Hired guns from the look of them. Victor smiled, but his eyes stayed cold. Thomas, good morning again. See, you survived another night with your guest. What do you want, Victor? To make you an offer. A generous one. $500 if you return Ayanna to me. No questions asked. No consequences. You can go back to your quiet life and I'll forget you interfered. She's not for sale. Everything's for sale, Thomas. You just haven't found your price yet. One of the hired guns leaned forward. Boss, we could just take her. One man can't stop all of us. Victor raised a hand. Patience, I'm trying to be civilized here. He turned back to Thomas. 700. That's more money than you'll see in 3 years of ranching. All you have to do is step aside. No. 1,000. No amount of money makes selling a human being right. Victor's expression hardened. You self-righteous fool, you have no idea what you're protecting. That woman is carrying my child. My blood. You think I'll just let her run off with it? Give birth to my heir in some cave like an animal. The words hung in the frozen air. So Victor knew, had probably known from the start. Thomas kept his voice steady. She's not a broodmare, and that child isn't yours, not in any way that matters. The law says differently. Territorial law gives fathers rights over their offspring. I can claim that child the day it's born. Ayanna knows this. That's why she ran, not to save herself, but to keep my child from me. Behind Thomas, the cabin door opened. Ayanna stood there, one hand on her stomach, the other gripping the doorframe. That's a lie, she called out. You don't want this baby. You want control. You want to own something you can never have. Victor's mask slipped for just a moment. Something raw and furious flickered across his face. You're right, he said, quietly. I want control because 15 years ago, I married an Apache woman. Beautiful. Strong. Everything a man could want. I gave her everything, a house, safety, respect. And you know what she did? She left me. Went back to her tribe. Said my world was poison. Said she'd rather live poor and free than rich and trapped. His voice dropped lower, colder. She died 3 years later. Fever. And I swore I'd never let an Apache woman slip through my fingers again. Never let one think she's better off without me. So yes, Ayanna, I want you. I want that child. I want to prove that your kind needs men like me. That without us, you are nothing. Silence fell like snow. The ugliness of Victor's truth sat exposed in the winter light. Thomas raised his rifle. Get off my land. Victor stared at him for a long moment. Then he smiled, cold and patient. This isn't over, Brennan. Not by a long shot. I'll give you 3 days. 3 days to come to your senses and bring her to town. After that, I stop being civilized. After that, I take what's mine by force. And if you stand in my way, he let the threat hang unfinished. The riders wheeled and rode off, kicking up snow. Thomas stood on the porch until they vanished, then lowered the rifle with shaking hands. Ayanna moved beside him. He's not bluffing. In 3 days, he'll come with an army. Thomas looked at her, this woman who'd stumbled into his life and upended everything he thought he knew about himself. Then we have 3 days to find a way to stop him. How? I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out. He took her hand. Together. Ayanna squeezed his fingers. Together. The word felt like a promise, like a vow, like the beginning of something neither of them fully understood, but both were willing to fight for. 3 days, 72 hours to find a way to beat a man who owned half the territory. Thomas had faced down blizzards and wolves and the slow grinding loneliness of years alone. But this was different. This was war. And for the first time in his life, Thomas Brennan had something worth fighting for that scared him more than death itself. The first day passed in tense preparation. Thomas rode to his nearest neighbor, Marcus Wolfe, a grizzled rancher who had fought in the Civil War and carried the scars to prove it. Marcus listened to the story while sharpening his hunting knife, his one good eye never leaving Thomas's face. When Thomas finished, Marcus set down the blade. Victor Calloway, you picked one hell of an enemy son. I didn't pick him. He picked this fight. Doesn't matter who started it. Matters who finishes it. Marcus stood and limped to his gun cabinet. I fought for 4 years so men like him couldn't own people anymore. Guess that fight never really ended. He pulled out a shotgun and a box of shells. I'll stand with you when he comes. But Thomas, you need to understand what you're asking. Victor doesn't just have hired guns. He has legitimacy, papers, law on his side. Thomas accepted the ammunition. Then we need to take that away from him. I'm still working that out. Marcus studied him for a long moment. This woman, Ayanna, she worth dying for. The question stopped Thomas cold. Was she? He'd known her 4 days. 4 days of crisis and confession and moments that felt like falling. Could you build something real on that foundation? Then he remembered her hand in his, the way she'd looked at him when he stood up to Victor, the quiet strength in her voice when she said together, "Yes," Thomas said simply, "she is." Marcus nodded slowly. Then I'll be ready. When Victor comes, you fire 2 shots in the air. I'll hear them and I'll come running. Bring my boys too. We'll make him think twice about starting a war. Thomas shook the old soldier's hand. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This might be the last thing either of us does. The ride back felt longer than it should. Dark clouds gathered in the west, promising another storm. Thomas urged his horse faster, suddenly desperate to get back to the cabin. To Ayanna, to the only warmth left in a world gone cold. She was waiting on the porch when he arrived wrapped in his coat. Relief washed over her face when she saw him. You were gone so long, I thought. I'm here. Thomas dismounted and pulled her into his arms. She fit against him like she'd always belonged there. Marcus Wolf will help when the time comes. He's gathering his sons. We won't be alone. Ayanna pulled back to look at him. Thomas, I've been thinking. Maybe I should just go. Leave tonight. Head north to the Montana Territory. Start over somewhere Victor can't find me. Alone pregnant in winter. I've survived worse. That's not living, that's running. Thomas cupped her face. And I don't want you to spend the rest of your life running. What's the alternative? Staying here and letting good men die for me. Victor will bring an army. Marcus and his sons, they're ranchers, not soldiers. They'll be slaughtered. Not if we have leverage first. We've been through this. There is no leverage. Thomas led her inside where warmth still radiated from the stove. He'd been thinking all day during the ride to Marcus's place and back, turning the problem over like a stone, looking for cracks. Victor let something slip this morning, about his wife, the Apache woman who left him. That's his weakness, his pride, his need to prove he's in control. Ayanna shook her head. How does that help us? Everyone already knows he's powerful. But they don't know he's obsessed. They don't know he's chasing you, not because of money or the baby, but because he can't stand the idea of another Apache woman rejecting him. Thomas paced the small cabin. What if we expose that, make the whole territory see he's not a businessman protecting his interests, he's a man consumed by revenge for a woman who left him 15 years ago? You think people will care, Thomas? Most of them think I deserve whatever Victor does to me. I'm Apache, a widow, pregnant. In their eyes, I'm already ruined. Not if we change the story, not if we make you the victim of a powerful man's obsession instead of... He stopped seeing her face. I'm sorry, I'm not explaining this right. Ayanna sat heavily at the table. No, you're right. It's all about the story people tell themselves. Right now, Victor's story is that I'm a thief and a debtor. If we can change that story, make him the villain instead of the victim, maybe public opinion shifts enough that he backs down. Exactly. But how we have no proof, no witnesses, no one who will testify against him. Thomas stopped pacing. What about the other women who work at the Lucky Star? Are they all loyal to Victor, or are some of them trapped like you were? Something flickered in Ayanna's expression. There was one, Sarah Thornton, young, maybe 19. She came to Wyoming looking for work, and Victor hired her. She served drinks at first, but I heard... Ayanna hesitated. I heard Victor took an interest in her. Same pattern, same threats, but she never ran. Just got quieter and sadder until she barely spoke at all. Would she testify? I don't know. She's terrified of him. They all are. Then we find a way to protect her, give her a reason to speak up. Ayana stood and moved to the window. It's not just about protection. It's about believing anything will change. I've seen what happens to women who accuse powerful men. The town turns on them, calls them liars, whores, attention seekers. Even if Sarah told the truth, even if she had proof, who would believe her over Victor Calloway? The despair in her voice cut deeper than any blade. Thomas moved behind her, wrapping his arms around her shoulders. Then we make them believe. We find others. Build a case so overwhelming they can't ignore it. In 3 days, we have to try. Ayana leaned back against him. You're an optimist. I forgot people like you existed. I'm not an optimist. I'm just stubborn. She laughed, small and surprised, and the sound filled the cabin with something close to hope. That night, they sat by the fire planning. Thomas sketched a rough map of Red Creek on the back of an old newspaper. The Lucky Star Saloon sat at the center of town. Victor owned the hotel next door, a general store, the livery stable. His influence spread like roots from a poison tree. He doesn't own everything, Thomas said, pointing. The church, the doctor's office, the newspaper. The newspaper won't touch him. Editor's afraid. What about the church? Who's the preacher? Father Murphy, old Irish priest. Good man, but he's careful. Doesn't involve himself in temporal matters. Thomas sat back. What if we went to the territorial marshal, bypassed Red Creek entirely? The marshal's office is in Cheyenne, 3 days' ride in good weather. In winter, Ayana shook her head. We'd never make it before Victor's deadline. And even if we did, marshals don't investigate on the word of an Apache woman. We'd need evidence first. Every avenue seemed blocked. Every path led back to the same problem: Victor's power and their lack of proof. Thomas threw another log on the fire, watching sparks rise toward the chimney. His mother used to say the hardest problems required the simplest solutions. Stop thinking like the enemy expects and start thinking like yourself. What if we don't fight him? Thomas said slowly. What if instead of confronting him, we make him irrelevant? You said he wants control, wants to prove Apache women need him. What if we prove the opposite? What if you don't just survive without him? You thrive. Ayana stared at him. Thomas, I'm not following. Marry me. The words hung in the air between them. Ayana's eyes went wide. That's insane. Think about it. Right now, Victor claims you owe him money, claims the baby is his, claims you're bound to him by contract and law. But if you're my wife, legally married, all of that changes. The baby becomes mine in the eyes of the law. The debt becomes my responsibility, which I can discharge. And most importantly, you're no longer alone, no longer vulnerable. You're under the protection of a married name. Ayana stood abruptly. Thomas, you can't marry me. Not like this. Not as a legal maneuver. Why not? Because marriage should mean something. It should be about love and choice, and she gestured helplessly. Not strategy. Thomas stood and took her hands. Who says it's just strategy, Ayana? I know this is fast. I know we barely know each other. But these last 4 days, I've felt more alive than I have in 7 years. You make me want to be braver than I am. You make me want to protect something beyond just myself. If that's not love, it's close enough for me. Tears brimmed in her eyes. You're doing this out of pity. I'm doing this out of hope. Hope that maybe two broken people can build something whole together. I'm pregnant with another man's child. Then we'll raise that child as ours. Teach them they're not defined by how they began, but by how they're loved. Ayana pulled her hands away and turned to the fire. The whole territory will mock you. Call you a fool who married damaged goods. Say you're raising your enemies, bastard. I don't care what they say. You should care. Words have power. They'll poison everything. Our children, if we have more, will be tainted by association. You'll lose business, friends, respect. Thomas moved to stand beside her. I'd rather have you and lose everything else than keep everything else and lose you. She looked at him, then really looked, searching his face for lies or hidden motives. Thomas met her gaze steadily. He'd never been more certain of anything in his life. This is madness, she whispered. Probably. We've known each other 4 days. 5 if you count today. That's not better. I know. Ayana closed her eyes. If I say yes, if I agree to this, it has to be real, not just on paper. I won't be a wife in name, only some legal fiction to thwart Victor. If we do this, it's everything or nothing. Thomas's heart hammered against his ribs. Everything then. She opened her eyes and he saw fear and hope warring in equal measure. Your mother's promise led me to you. I'm certain of that now. How can you be certain? Because she told me I'd know the right person when they scared me. When they made me want to be someone better than I am. You terrify me, Ayanna, and I've never wanted anything more than I want this. The fire crackled. Outside, wind rattled the shutters. Inside, two people stood on the edge of a precipice looking down at the rest of their lives. Finally, Ayanna spoke. If we do this, really do this, I need you to understand something. I'm broken in ways you can't see. Victor, he didn't just hurt my body. He broke something inside me. Trust, the ability to feel safe. Sometimes I wake up and I can't breathe because I'm back in that room with him on top of me and his men holding my arms, and her voice cracked. I don't know if I can ever be the wife you deserve. Thomas cupped her face gently. You're already more than I deserve. And Ayanna, I'm broken too. Different breaks, but just as real. I've spent 7 years hiding behind a dead woman's promise because I was too afraid to live. We're both damaged, but maybe that's why we fit. Because we understand that healing isn't about being fixed. It's about finding someone who loves you despite the cracks. Ayanna let out a shuddering breath. You're too good for this world, Thomas Brennan. Then it's lucky I found you to drag me down to earth. She laughed through her tears. Ask me properly. Thomas dropped to one knee right there in front of the fireplace. He had no ring, no prepared speech, just rough hands and a heart that felt too large for his chest. Ayanna Stormwind, will you marry me, not as a strategy or a legal maneuver, but as my partner, my equal, the person I choose to build a life with, whatever that life looks like? Ayanna looked down at him, this man she'd known 5 days, who'd already risked everything for her. This man who saw past her scars as something worth saving. This man who somehow made her believe in futures again. Yes, she breathed. God help us both, yes. Thomas stood and kissed her. Not gentle this time. Desperate and deep, like drowning and surfacing at once. Ayanna kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. When, Ayanna asked. Tomorrow. We ride to Father Murphy's church, get married before Victor can stop us. He'll try. The second he hears, he'll come. Then we move fast. Early morning, in and out before word spreads. Ayanna nodded, then her expression shifted. Thomas, if we do this, if we marry, there's something else you need to know. Something I haven't told you yet. Dread coiled in his stomach. What? She took his hand and placed it on her belly. The baby. It's not just that I'm pregnant. It's how far along I am. I'm nearly 3 months now. By the time I give birth, she met his eyes. Everyone will know the child isn't yours. They'll count backwards and realize we married after I was already showing. There will be no hiding this. Thomas kept his hand on her belly, feeling nothing yet, but knowing life grew beneath his palm. Let them count. Let them whisper. This child will be ours. That's all that matters. You say that now, but when you're holding a baby that has Victor's face, it won't have Victor's face. It'll have yours, your strength, your spirit, and it'll have my name and my protection and my love. That's more than blood. That's choice. Ayanna's tears fell freely now. I don't deserve you. You keep saying that. I wish you'd stop. Why? Because every time you say it, I hear Victor's voice in yours. Hear his poison. And I need you to know you deserve everything good in this world. Everything. And if spending the rest of my life proving that to you is what I have to do, then I'll consider it time well spent. Ayanna broke then. Really broke. Collapsed into Thomas's arms, sobbing. Not sad tears, but something deeper. The sound of walls crumbling, of armor shedding, of someone who'd carried too much for too long, finally having somewhere safe to set it down. Thomas held her through it all, one hand stroking her hair, the other pressed against her back. Outside, the wind howled, but inside, something was being built. Something fragile and fierce and worth defending. When her tears finally slowed, Ayana pulled back and wiped her face. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Don't apologize, not for this, not ever. She managed a watery smile. Tomorrow then, we get married. Tomorrow. And after when Victor finds out, after we fight, together. Ayana nodded slowly, then she took his hand and led him toward his bedroom. Thomas's heart stuttered. Ayana, I know, she said softly, your mother's promise. You wanted to wait until marriage. Well, she turned to face him. Tomorrow we'll be married. But tonight I need to know this is real. I need to know you really want this. Want me. Not as charity or obligation, but as a choice. Can you give me that? Thomas's throat went dry. 7 years of waiting, 7 years of promises and loneliness and wondering if he'd ever find someone who made breaking his vow worth it. He looked at Ayana, really looked, at the bruises still fading on her shoulders, at the strength in her eyes despite everything she'd endured, at the way she stood before him, offering herself not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Yes, he said simply, I can give you that. Ayana's smile was small and genuine, and the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. Then come here and show me. What happened next was clumsy and tender and real. Thomas had waited 32 years for this, and his inexperience showed in the fumbling of buttons and the hesitation of hands. But Ayana guided him with patience and something that looked like wonder, as if she couldn't quite believe this was really happening. When they finally came together, it wasn't the explosive passion of storybooks. It was quieter than that, more profound. Two people choosing each other in the most fundamental way possible, promising with bodies what words could only approximate. Afterward, they lay tangled in blankets, the fire's glow painting shadows on the ceiling. Thomas traced idle patterns on Ayana's shoulder, marveling at the simple fact of her beside him. I love you, he said quietly. Ayana stiffened slightly. Thomas, I know, it's too soon. We barely know each other. But I need you to know that when I marry you tomorrow, it won't be strategy. It'll be because somewhere between that first night in the snowstorm and right now, I fell completely in love with you. She was silent for a long moment. Then, I don't know if I can say it back yet. Not because I don't feel something I do, but the word love, it's been used against me too many times. Men who said they loved me and then hurt me. Victor said he loved me right before she stopped. I need time before that word means something good again. Thomas kissed her temple. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. Ayana curled closer. Ask me again in a year, when you've seen all my broken peas and still haven't run. Then I'll be able to say it back and mean it. It's a deal. They drifted into sleep, holding each other, and for the first time in years, neither of them was alone. Morning came too fast, and with it fresh snow. Thomas woke before dawn and dressed quietly, letting Ayana sleep a while longer. He needed to prepare for what was coming, needed to be ready for Victor's response when word of the marriage spread. He was loading supplies into saddlebags when Ayana emerged, already dressed in the cleanest clothes she had. The blue dress she'd worn the night as she arrived, mended and brushed as best she could manage. You look beautiful, Thomas said. I look like someone trying to get married in a borrowed dress. Same thing. They ate a quick breakfast, neither tasting the food. Nerves made everything feel unreal, like walking through someone else's life. By the time they rode out, the sun was just cresting the eastern peaks, turning the snow gold. The journey to town would take 2 hours. 2 hours to think about what they were doing. 2 hours for doubt to creep in. But when Thomas glanced at Ayana riding beside him, she looked steady, resolved. Whatever fear she had, she'd lock them away. They were halfway to Red Creek when they saw the riders. 4 men on horseback, moving fast across the open prairie. Not Victor's men, Thomas recognized these. Jacob Winters and his brothers, local ranchers, who occasionally did business with Thomas. Jacob reined up when he saw them. Thomas didn't expect to run into you out here. Morning, Jacob. What's got you riding so early? Jacob's eyes flicked to Ayana, then back to Thomas. Something uneasy crossed his face. Heard some news in town last night. Thought you should know. Victor Calloway's been spreading word about an Apache woman who stole from him. Put out a bounty, $200 for information on her whereabouts, $500 for her return. Ice flooded Thomas's veins. A bounty. Posted it at the Lucky Star, the general store, even the church. Says she's dangerous, a thief and a liar. Says she seduced him and ran off pregnant, trying to extort money by claiming the child's his. Ayana went pale. That's not true. None of it's true. Jacob looked uncomfortable. Ma'am, I'm not saying I believe him, but Victor's a respected man. Has papers, a signed contract. And you no offense, but you're Apache, not married, pregnant. In the eyes of most folks, he trailed off. In the eyes of most folks, I'm guilty before I open my mouth. Ayana finished bitterly. Thomas's jaw clenched. We're on our way to change that right now. Ayana and I are getting married, this morning, at Father Murphy's church. Jacob's eyebrows shot up. Thomas, are you sure about this? Victor's not going to take kindly to... I don't care what Victor takes kindly to. He's offering money, Thomas. Good money. In winter, when most folks are barely scraping by. You think loyalty to a neighbor is going to outweigh $500? The words hit like stones. Of course. Victor wasn't just creating a legal problem. He was creating an economic incentive, making it profitable to betray them. One of Jacob's brothers spoke up, younger and harder-eyed. 500 would pay off our banknote. Keep us from losing the ranch. Jacob shot him a look. Shut up, Daniel. But the damage was done. Thomas saw the calculation in Daniel's eyes, saw desperation meeting opportunity. We're not interested in Victor's money, Thomas said carefully. But if you're having troubles with the bank, come see me after winter. We'll work something out, neighbor to neighbor. Daniel sneered, you don't have 500 to spare. Everyone knows you're barely hanging on yourself. Why should we stay poor to protect your Apache whore? Thomas's hand moved to his rifle. Jacob grabbed his brother's reins. Daniel, shut your damn mouth. Thomas, I apologize for my brother. The boy's got more greed than sense. He looked at Ayana. Ma'am, I don't know your story. Don't know if what Victor says is true or not. But I do know Thomas Brennan. Known him since I came to this territory. He's the most honest man I've ever met. If he's standing with you, that's good enough for me. Thomas felt some of the tension ease. Thank you, Jacob. Don't thank me yet. I can vouch for myself and my family, but I can't vouch for the rest of the territory. Victor's bounty, it's going to bring every desperate soul out of the woodwork. You need to be careful. Real careful. We will be. Jacob nodded and gathered his reins. Good luck with the wedding. And Thomas, whatever comes next, don't hesitate. Victor's men won't. He spurred his horse and his brothers followed, though Daniel kept looking back. Speculation written plain on his face. When they were gone, Ayana spoke quietly. He's going to tell Victor where we are. Jacob. The brother, Daniel. $500 is more money than most people see in a year. He'll ride straight to the Lucky Star and collect. Thomas knew she was right, saw it as clearly as she did. They had maybe an hour before Victor knew exactly where they were heading. Then we ride faster, Thomas said. Get married before he can stop us. They kicked their horses to a gallop, snow spraying beneath hooves. The wind cut cold against Thomas's face. Beside him, Ayana leaned low over her horse's neck, hair streaming behind her like a black flag. Red Creek appeared in the distance, a cluster of wooden buildings huddled against the white prairie. The church sat at the northern edge, a simple structure with a cross on the roof. They were 300 yards out when Ayana pointed. Thomas, look. He followed her gaze and his heart sank. 5 horses tied outside the church. And standing on the steps, arms crossed, a smile on his silver-haired head, Victor Calloway. Thomas reined his horse to a stop. Ayana did the same. He knew, she said flatly. Somehow he knew. Doesn't matter, we're still getting married. Thomas, look at him. He's blocking the church. If we try to go in, then we go in. Thomas dismounted and offered his hand. After a moment, Ayana took it and slid from her saddle. They walked toward the church side by side. Victor watched them come, that smile never wavering. When they reached the bottom step, Victor spoke. Thomas, Ayana, what a lovely morning for a ride. Get out of our way, Victor. I'm afraid I can't do that. See, Father Murphy and I were just having a conversation about marriage law. Turns out there are some complications when one party is already under contract to another. Legal complications. Thomas felt Ayana's hand tighten in his. What kind of complications? Victor pulled a paper from his coat. Ayana signed a contract with me. Room board employment. standard terms. But buried in the fine print, which I admit she probably didn't read carefully, is a clause. Any woman in my employment who becomes pregnant is required to remain in my service until the child is weaned. Standard practice to prevent women from abandoning their responsibilities. That's not legal, Thomas said. Actually, it is. Territorial law allows for indenture contracts in certain circumstances. The judge in Red Creek, Judge Morrison, reviewed it personally, signed off on it. Ayanna is legally bound to me for another year at minimum. Ayanna's face went white. You're lying. I have the documents right here, signed by you, witnessed, filed with the territorial clerk. You're mine, Ayanna. The only way out of that contract is if I choose to release you, which I'm perfectly willing to do for a price. Thomas stepped forward. Name it. Victor's smile widened. $10,000. The number hung in the air like an executioner's blade. 10,000. More money than Thomas would see in 10 years of ranching. An impossible sum. You know I don't have that, Thomas said quietly. I know, which means the only option left is for Ayanna to return with me and fulfill her contract. Unless, Victor's eyes glittered, unless you'd like to take her place. Sign yourself over to me for a year. Work off her debt with your labor. Thomas, no, Ayanna whispered. But Thomas was already calculating. A year of his life for her freedom, a year of servitude for the woman he loved. The math seemed simple. If I sign that contract, she goes free, completely free. No more claims on her or the baby. Thomas, don't do this. Victor held up a hand. If you sign, I'll tear up Ayanna's contract right here and now. She can marry whoever she wants. Raise that bastard however she sees fit. But you become mine for 1 year. And Thomas, I won't be gentle. You'll work harder than you've ever worked. I'll break you if I can. Turn you into a lesson for anyone else who thinks they can interfere with my business. Thomas looked at Ayanna, saw desperation and fury and love all warring in her expression. Then he looked back at Victor. Draw up the papers. No, Ayanna grabbed Thomas's arm. You can't do this. I won't let you. It's not your choice. The hell it isn't, Thomas. Think about what you're doing. 1 year with Victor, he'll destroy you. Work you to death. And for what? So I can be free. So I can raise this baby alone while you're... Her voice broke. I'd rather die than let you sacrifice yourself for me. Thomas cupped her face. I'm not sacrificing anything. I'm choosing. Choosing you. Choosing us. 1 year of my life for a lifetime with you, that's not sacrifice. That's the best deal I'll ever make. Tears streamed down her cheeks. You're a fool. Probably, but I'm your fool. Victor cleared his throat. Touching. Really. But I need an answer, Thomas. Do we have a deal? Thomas turned to face him. On one condition. The marriage happens first. I get to marry Ayanna before I sign anything. That way, even if something happens to me during that year, she's legally my widow. Protected. Provided for. Victor considered this. Clever. Trying to tie your hands legally so I can't just work you to death and take her anyway. He smiled. I accept. Marry her. Then sign. But Thomas, the moment those papers have your signature, your life belongs to me. And I promise you it's going to be the longest year of your existence. Father Murphy emerged from the church, then his old face drawn and troubled. This isn't right, Victor. You're manipulating these young people, exploiting their desperation. I'm conducting legal business, Father. Nothing more. Now, are you going to marry them or not? The priest looked at Thomas and Ayanna. Are you certain about this, my children? There are other ways. We're certain, Thomas said firmly. Please, Father, we need to do this now. Father Murphy nodded slowly, then come inside. The interior of the church was simple wooden pews, a plain altar, sunlight streaming through clear windows. Victor and his men followed them in watching like wolves. Father Murphy took his place at the altar. Thomas and Ayanna stood before him, still holding hands. The priest opened his prayer book and began the ceremony, voice solemn in the quiet space. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here in the sight of God. The words washed over Thomas like a river. Ancient words, promises made by countless couples before them. He squeezed Ayanna's hand, and she squeezed back, her eyes never leaving his face. When Father Murphy asked if there were any objections, Victor chuckled, but said nothing. When it came time for vows, Thomas spoke clearly. I, Thomas Brennan, take you Ayanna Stormwind to be my wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and health, till death do us part. Ayanna's voice shook but held firm. I, Ayanna Stormwind, take you Thomas Brennan to be my wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and health, till death do us part. Father Murphy blessed them. By the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, and by God Almighty I now pronounce you husband and wife. Thomas, you may kiss your bride. Thomas leaned in and kissed Ayanna gently. She kissed him back, tasting of salt tears and desperate hope. When they broke apart, Victor was already holding out the contract and a pen. Beautiful ceremony. Now, Thomas, your turn. Thomas took the pen. The contract was 2 pages of dense legal text. He scanned it quickly. 1 year of service. Room and board provided. No wages. Bound to Victor's property. Failure to comply means forfeiture of Ayanna's freedom and return of the baby to Victor's custody. Every word was a trap. Every clause a chain. Thomas signed his name at the bottom. Victor took the paper, examined the signature, then smiled. Excellent. Father Murphy, you're a witness. As are my men here, this contract is now binding. He turned to Ayanna. Congratulations, Mrs. Brennan, you're free. Your husband, on the other hand, he snapped his fingers and his men moved forward, grabbing Thomas's arms. Wait, Thomas said. I needed to tell her. You need to do nothing but come with me. The contract starts now. Victor looked at Ayanna. You want to see your husband again? He'll be released in exactly 1 year. Until then, stay out of my way. Try to interfere and I'll tear up this contract and come for you both. Ayanna lunged forward. Thomas! Victor's men dragged him toward the door. Thomas twisted in their grip, trying to see her one more time. Ayanna, listen to me. Go to Marcus Wolf. He'll help you. Take care of yourself and the baby. I'll come back. I promise I'll come back. Then they were outside, throwing him onto a horse. Ropes around his wrists. Victor mounted his own horse and looked down at the church where Ayanna now stood in the doorway, Father Murphy holding her back. 1 year, Mrs. Brennan, Victor called. Try to be patient. They rode off at a gallop, snow kicking up behind them. Thomas looked back and saw Ayanna collapse to her knees on the church steps, her scream cutting across the white prairie like a blade. Then they crested a hill, and she disappeared from view, and Thomas realized with cold certainty that he'd just made either the best or worst decision of his life. The ride to Victor's estate took 3 hours. They traveled south away from Red Creek and into rougher country where the law held less sway and men like Victor made their own rules. The estate sprawled across a valley, a main house, outbuildings, corrals, fields, now buried under snow. 60 hired men lived and worked here. Some were legitimate ranch hands. Others were thugs with guns, enforcers who kept order and handled Victor's dirty work. They threw Thomas in a shed behind the main house. No windows, a dirt floor, a single blanket and a bucket. The door locked from outside. Victor stood in the doorway, silhouetted against winter sun. Welcome to your new home, Thomas. You'll work from dawn to dusk, mucking stables, splitting wood, whatever I decide. You'll eat what I give you and sleep where I put you. Refuse and I send men to collect your pregnant wife. Understood. Thomas's jaw clenched. Understood. Good. We start tomorrow. Rest up. You're going to need it. The door slammed. The lock clicked. Darkness swallowed everything. Thomas sat on the dirt floor back against the cold wall. His wrists were raw from the ropes. His body ached from the rough ride. But worse than any physical pain was the image burned into his mind, Ayanna on her knees screaming his name. He'd married her and lost her in the same hour. 1 year, 365 days. He just had to survive that long. Stay alive. Stay strong. Then he could go home to his wife and the child they'd raised together. 1 year. Thomas closed his eyes and began to count. Dawn came with the scrape of metal on metal. The shed door swung open and harsh light flooded Thomas's prison. 2 of Victor's men stood, their faces hard as the frozen ground. The taller one jerked his thumb up. Boss wants you in the stables. Thomas's body protested every movement. The cold had seeped into his bones overnight, turning his joints to rust. He stumbled outside into air so frigid it burned his lungs. Snow had fallen during the night, covering the estate in fresh white that made everything look cleaner than it was. The stables reeked of manure and hay and horse sweat. 50 stalls stretched in 2 long rows, and every single one was filthy. Months of accumulated waste piled in corners. The smell hit Thomas like a fist. Victor stood at the entrance, immaculate in a black coat and polished boots. Your first task, clean every stall, haul the waste to the burn pile. Fresh hay in each one. I want this done by sunset. Thomas looked at the endless rows. That's 10 hours of work minimum. Then you better start now. I need food first, water. Victor smiled. You'll eat when the work is done, not before. Thomas's stomach was already hollow from missing yesterday's meals. The thought of working all day without food made his head swim. But arguing would only make things worse. He grabbed a pitchfork and started in the first stall. The work was brutal. Each stall held weeks of accumulated filth that had to be forked into a wheelbarrow, hauled 50 yards to the burn pile, dumped, then repeated. His hands blistered within the first hour. His back screamed by the second. But he kept moving, kept working, because stopping meant Victor won. Around midday, one of the stable hands, a young man with kind eyes, snuck him half a biscuit in a ladle of water. Thomas devoured, both grateful beyond words. The young man glanced around nervously. Name's Michael. I heard what you did. Marrying that Apache woman, taking her debt. Thomas leaned on the pitchfork, catching his breath. You think I'm a fool. Think you're braver than most. Victor, he's a monster. Everyone knows it, but no one dares stand against him. Michael paused. Your wife, she okay? The question hit harder than any physical blow. Thomas had been trying not to think about Ayanna, not to imagine her alone and pregnant and terrified. I don't know, Thomas admitted. I told her to go to my neighbor, Marcus Wolf. He's a good man. He'll help her. Hope you're right, because Victor, he's not done with her. I heard him talking last night. Said he'd wait until you were properly broken, then go collect her anyway. Claim the baby's his by right. Ice flooded Thomas's veins. The contract. Contracts only matter if someone enforces them. And out here, Victor is the law. Michael glanced toward the main house. Just wanted you to know, so you're not surprised when it happens. He hurried away before Thomas could respond. The biscuit turned to ash in Thomas's stomach. Victor had never intended to honor the deal. Of course he hadn't. This whole thing was about control, about breaking Thomas and taking Ayanna anyway. Thomas gripped the pitchfork tighter and returned to work with renewed fury. Each shovel of manure became an act of defiance. Each stall cleaned a promise kept. He would survive this, would find a way out, would get back to his wife before Victor could touch her again. Sunset came and Thomas wasn't finished. 3 stalls remained. His hands bled through torn blisters. His shoulders felt like they'd been beaten with hammers. But he kept working by lantern light until the last stall was clean and the last load hauled to the burn pile. When he finally stumbled back to the main house, Victor was waiting on the porch with a plate of cold beans and stale bread. Took you long enough. Eat, then back to your shed. Thomas ate standing up, too exhausted to care about dignity. The food tasted like nothing, but he forced it down anyway. Fuel, that's all it was. Fuel to survive another day. Back in the shed, he collapsed onto the dirt floor. Every muscle screamed, his hands throbbed. But worse than the pain was the fear. Michael's words echoed in his skull. Victor would come for Ayanna, would claim the baby, would destroy everything Thomas had sacrificed to protect. He had to find a way to warn her. Had to get word out somehow. But how? Victor's men watched him constantly. Even now he heard boots pacing outside the shed. Guards making sure he didn't run. Thomas closed his eyes and thought of Ayanna's face. Her fierce eyes, her scarred shoulders. The way she'd looked at him in the church when they said their vows. He'd promised to return, promised to come back to her. And Thomas Brennan kept his promises, even if it killed him. The days blurred together into an endless cycle of exhaustion and pain. Wake at dawn, work until dark, eat whatever scraps Victor provided, collapse in the shed, repeat. Thomas chopped wood until his hands were raw stumps, hauled water from the frozen creek until his back seized, mended fences in brutal cold until his fingers went numb. Victor always found new tasks, always pushed harder. 2 weeks in, Thomas collapsed while carrying feed sacks, just fell face first into the snow and couldn't get up. His body had reached its limit. Victor's men dragged him to the main house and dropped him on the floor of the kitchen. Victor looked down at him with something like disappointment. Pathetic. I thought you'd last longer than this. Thomas tried to speak, but his throat was too dry. A woman appeared, older Apache, with gray streaking her black hair. She knelt beside Thomas and felt his forehead. He has fever, exhaustion. If you work him more, he'll die. Victor frowned. Fine. 3 days rest. But if he's not back to full strength by then, I'm sending men to collect his wife. She can work off his debt instead. The Apache woman helped Thomas to a small room off the kitchen. A real bed, blankets, warmth. She brought him broth and made him drink even when he wanted to refuse. What's your name? Thomas managed. Naomi. I cook for Victor. Have for 10 years. Why do you stay? Naomi's face hardened. Same reason most of us stay. Because leaving means dying. Victor doesn't let people go easily. Thomas studied her. You knew his wife, the Apache woman who left him. Naomi's hands stilled. How do you know about her? Victor mentioned her, said she left him, died 3 years later. Her name was Wakanda. She was my sister. Naomi's voice went distant. Beautiful, strong. Victor courted her for months, promised her everything. She believed him, married him, and for the first year he was good to her, gave her nice things, treated her like a queen. She paused, stirring the broth. Then she got pregnant, lost the baby at 5 months. Something went wrong with the birth. She nearly died. The doctor said she could never have children again. That's when Victor changed, started drinking, started hitting her, said she'd failed him, that she was worthless if she couldn't give him an heir. Thomas's chest tightened. What happened to her? She ran, came back to our tribe. But the damage was done not just to her body, but to her spirit. She died 2 winters later. Some said it was fever. I think it was a broken heart. Naomi looked at Thomas with eyes full of old grief. Victor blamed her for leaving, said if she'd stayed, he could have fixed her, made her useful again. He's been trying to prove something ever since. Every Apache woman he meets, he has to control, has to own. It's his sickness. Ayanna, Thomas breathed. She's not safe, even with the contract. No one is safe from Victor, especially not Apache women. Naomi stood. Rest now, build your strength, you'll need it. Over the next 3 days, Thomas learned more about Victor's empire from Naomi and the other workers who moved through the kitchen. Learned that Victor owned not just the Lucky Star Saloon, but a network of brothels and gambling halls across 3 territories. Learned that he trafficked women, bought them from desperate families, or kidnapped them outright, then sold them to wealthy men in Denver and San Francisco. Learned that Ayanna wasn't the first woman to sign a contract and discover it was really a prison sentence. There were 6 others currently working in Victor's establishment, all trapped, all too terrified to run. And Thomas learned something else, something that changed everything. Michael, the young stable hand, came to visit on the 3rd day. He brought news from town. Your wife, she's still at your ranch. Your neighbor, Marcus Wolf, he's been checking on her, bringing supplies. But Thomas, Michael's face was grave. She's showing now. Everyone in Red Creek knows she's pregnant. Victor's been spreading rumors, saying the baby's his, that you married her to hide his child, that you're a fool raising another man's bastard. Thomas's fists clenched. It's not true. I know, but most folks believe him. Victor's got influence. And your wife, she's Apache, alone, pregnant. People are starting to say things, calling her names. Some are even suggesting Victor has a right to his child. The room spun. Thomas forced himself to breathe through the rage. There's more, Michael said quietly. Judge Morrison, the one who validated Victor's contracts, he's Victor's cousin. They're family. The whole legal system here is rigged. Every contract, every ruling, it's all designed to give Victor what he wants. Thomas looked up sharply. You can prove that. I've seen letters, correspondence between them. Victor keeps them in his office. Talks about dividing profits from the contracts, splitting the money from selling women. It's all there in writing. Can you get those letters? Michael paled. If Victor catches me, please, it's the only way to stop him. The only way to save Ayanna and all the other women he's trapped. Michael swallowed hard. I'll try. But Thomas, if I do this and get caught, Victor won't just kill me. He'll kill my family too. My mother and sisters work in town. He'll hurt them to hurt me. Then we'll protect them. Get them out first. Hide them somewhere safe. Where Victor owns this whole valley, there's nowhere safe. Thomas thought hard. Then Father Murphy, the church. Victor might own the law, but he won't attack a priest openly. Not even he's that brazen. Get your family to the church. Have Father Murphy give them sanctuary. Then get those letters. Michael nodded slowly. It might work. If I'm fast, if I'm lucky. Thank you. You're saving more lives than you know. After Michael left, Thomas lay back on the bed, mind racing. The letters could change everything. Proof that Victor was trafficking women, that the contracts were fraudulent, that he'd bribed judges and corrupted the legal system. With evidence like that, even Victor's money couldn't protect him. But getting the letters was only step one. They'd still need to get them to someone who could act on them. The territorial marshal. Maybe even federal authorities if the crimes crossed state lines. Thomas's fever had broken, but his body still felt like it had been trampled by horses. 3 days' rest wasn't enough. But Victor's deadline was coming. Soon he'd have to return to work, or Victor would send men for Ayanna. He closed his eyes and prayed not to God exactly, but to his mother's memory. Asked her if he was doing the right thing. If this sacrifice was worth it. If Ayanna was the woman she'd wanted him to wait for. In his mind, he heard his mother's voice. You'll know because she'll scare you. Because she'll ask you to become someone new. Ayanna terrified him. Made him brave and foolish in equal measure. Made him believe love was worth dying for. Yes, Thomas thought. She's the one. And I'll burn down Victor's empire to get back to her. On the 4th morning, Victor came personally to check on Thomas. Looked him over like inspecting cattle. Better, good, time to get back to work. And Thomas, I have a special task for you today. Something that requires discretion. Dread pulled in Thomas's gut. What kind of task? There's a woman, Sarah Thornton. She worked at the Lucky Star until recently. Now she's claiming I assaulted her, making noise about going to the marshal. I need her silenced. Thomas's blood went cold. What do you mean silenced? I mean scared, convinced to leave the territory and never come back. You're going to deliver that message. I won't threaten a woman for you. Victor's smile was ice. You will, because if you refuse, I'll assume you're in breach of contract. And breach means I send men for your wife tonight. Is that what you want? Thomas's mind raced. Sarah Thornton Ayanna had mentioned her, the young woman who'd also been trapped by Victor. If she was finally speaking up, finally ready to testify, then she could be the key to bringing Victor down. But if Thomas refused this task, Victor would go after Ayanna immediately. What exactly do you want me to say to her? Thomas asked carefully. Tell her I know where her mother lives in Denver. Tell her accidents happen. Tell her to take the money I'm offering and disappear, or her mother will suffer the consequences. Blackmail, threats against an innocent woman's family. Everything Victor was asking Thomas to do violated every principle he held. But if he refused, Ayanna paid the price. Thomas stood on shaky legs. Where do I find Sarah? She's staying at the boarding house in Red Creek, room 7. Go now. Be back by nightfall. Victor's men saddled a horse for Thomas, watched him mount. 2 of them rode with him as escorts, making sure he didn't run, didn't deviate from the task. The ride to Red Creek took an hour. Thomas used the time to think, to plan. He had to warn Sarah about the threat without actually threatening her. Had to find a way to help her while still convincing Victor's men he'd followed orders. The boarding house sat on the edge of town, a tired 2-story building that had seen better decades. Thomas dismounted and Victor's men stayed outside watching. He climbed to the 2nd floor and knocked on room 7. The door opened a crack. A young woman peered out, barely 20, with red hair and frightened eyes. When she saw Thomas, recognition flickered across her face. You're the man who married Ayanna. I heard about it, about what you did. Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. What do you want? Victor sent me to deliver a message. His men are outside. They're watching. So I need you to react like you're scared. Can you do that? Sarah's eyes widened, but she nodded slightly. Thomas raised his voice so Victor's men could hear through the thin walls. Victor knows about your mother in Denver, knows where she lives. He says if you don't stop making accusations, he'll make sure she has an accident. He's offering you $500 to leave the territory. You have until tomorrow to decide. Sarah let out a convincing sob. Perfect. But Thomas wasn't done. He leaned closer and dropped his voice to barely audible. Don't take the money. Don't run. Go to Father Murphy's church. There's a plan. People are gathering evidence against Victor. We need you to testify when the time comes. Can you be brave a little longer? Sarah's sob turned real. Tears streamed down her face. She nodded so slight it was almost imperceptible. Thomas stepped back. Tomorrow, noon. That's your deadline. He turned and walked away, heart pounding. Behind him, he heard Sarah close the door and the muffled sound of crying. Downstairs, Victor's men were waiting. She understood. She understood. She's terrified. I think she'll take the money and run. The men seemed satisfied. They rode back to Victor's estate in silence. Thomas's mind was already 3 steps ahead. If Sarah went to Father Murphy, if she connected with Michael and the others, gathering evidence, if they could all coordinate, maybe there was a way out of this after all. Back at the estate, Victor was pleased. Good work. See how easy it is when you cooperate. Keep this up, and maybe I'll let you visit your wife in a few months. Let her see what's become of her brave husband. The cruelty was casual, effortless. This was a man who'd spent so long being powerful that he'd forgotten other people were real. Thomas returned to his shed, to his dirt floor and thin blanket. But tonight the darkness felt less oppressive, because things were moving. Pieces were shifting on a board Victor didn't even know existed. 2 weeks later, Michael came in last night, woke Thomas by tossing a pebble through the shed's air vent. Thomas, wake up, I have them. Thomas scrambled to the vent, a small gap near the ceiling meant for ventilation. Michael's face appeared on the other side, barely visible in the moonlight. The letters, I got them, copies of everything, the correspondence with Judge Morrison, receipts from women sold, contracts with false signatures, everything. Thomas's heart hammered. Where are they now? Hidden at Father Murphy's church, under the floorboards in the rectory. Sarah's there too, and my family. 6 other women who escaped Victor's contracts. They're all ready to testify. We need to get word to the territorial marshal, someone outside Victor's influence. Father Murphy sent a courier 3 days ago. The marshal is coming, should be here in a week, maybe less. A week, 7 more days of this hell, 7 more days of pretending to be broken while hope burned in his chest like a secret flame. What about Ayanna? Thomas asked. Is she safe? Michael's face fell. Thomas, there's something you need to know. Victor's been sending men to watch your ranch, not to hurt her, just to watch. He's waiting for something. Waiting for what? For her to give birth. He's convinced the baby is his. Says the moment it's born, he's going to claim it. Take it from her. Raise it as his heir. Thomas's hands gripped the rough wood of the shed wall. The contract says, contracts don't matter, not to Victor. He's planning to just take what he wants and deal with the consequences later. And Thomas, your wife is 7 months along now. The baby's coming soon. If the marshal doesn't arrive before she gives birth, we have to speed this up. Can Father Murphy send another courier? Someone faster. I'll ask, but Thomas, even if the marshal comes, it's not over. Victor has friends, money, influence. He might walk away from this. Not if we have enough evidence. Not if enough people testify about him. Michael nodded, but his eyes held doubt. They both knew how the world worked, how justice bent toward power and money. But they had to try, had to believe that sometimes the truth mattered more than gold. One more thing, Michael said. Your wife, Ayanna, she sent a message through Marcus Wolf. She said to tell you she's counting the days, said she hasn't forgotten, said she's waiting for you to come home. The words hit like sunlight breaking through clouds. Thomas felt tears prick his eyes for the first time since this nightmare began. Tell her I'm coming. Tell her to hold on. Tell her I love her and I'm coming home. Michael disappeared into the night. Thomas lay back down on the dirt floor, but sleep wouldn't come. His mind was too full of plans and possibilities and desperate hope. Somewhere out there, Ayana was counting days too, waiting, believing, growing their child in her belly, a child conceived in Victor's violence but claimed by Thomas's love. A child who would never know the cruelty of its beginning because Thomas would spend his life making sure it knew only protection and care. 1 week, 7 more days, then the marshal would come and everything would change. Thomas just had to survive until then. The next 5 days passed in a blur of work and whispered updates. Michael brought news each night through the vent. The marshal was 2 days out, then 1 day, then arriving tomorrow morning. Father Murphy had gathered all the witnesses at the church. Sarah Thornton and 6 other women all ready to testify about Victor's trafficking operation. The letters were secured, everything was ready. But on the 6th night, disaster struck. Thomas woke to shouting and the smell of smoke. He stumbled to the shed door and pounded on it. "What's happening? What's going on?" One of Victor's men yanked the door open. "Town's on fire. The church, someone torched it." Thomas's blood turned to ice. "The people inside, boss is handling it." "You stay here," the door slammed. Locked. Thomas was trapped listening to chaos unfold outside. Horses galloping, men yelling, the crackle of distant flames. An hour later, Victor came to the shed. His face was smudged with soot, but his expression was triumphant. "Tragic accident. The church caught fire. Spread fast. Father Murphy barely made it out alive. Unfortunately, some others weren't so lucky." Thomas lunged forward. "What did you do?" "Me, nothing. I was here all night, but my men report that several people who'd been sheltering in the church perished in the blaze. Such a shame, including that troublesome Sarah Thornton." Victor's smile was cold. He couldn't know that Sarah had left the church an hour before the fire sent by Father Murphy to gather firewood from the parish storehouse. That she'd seen the flames from a distance and hidden in the trees watching in horror as Victor's men rode away. Horror crashed over Thomas like a wave. "You murdered them. You burned them alive." "I didn't do anything, and there's no proof otherwise. Just a terrible tragedy." The marshal will arrive tomorrow to find only ashes and grief. No witnesses, no evidence, nothing. Thomas wanted to kill him, wanted to wrap his hands around Victor's throat and squeeze until the life left those cold eyes. But the chains of the contract held him as surely as iron. Victor smiled. "The good news is your contract is almost up. Just 1 more month. I've been thinking maybe I'll extend it. Another year. Or maybe I'll just send my men to collect your wife now. Take the baby when it's born. Would you like that?" The marshal will investigate. He'll know you were involved. The marshal will find a tragic fire and no credible witnesses. And even if he suspects something, he'll have no proof. Because all the evidence burned up with those poor souls in the church. Victor turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Thomas, I lied. The contract doesn't end in a month. I forged the date. It actually says 2 years. You're mine for another 12 months after that. I hope you weren't counting the days too hopefully." He walked away laughing. Thomas sank to his knees in the dirt. Everything they'd worked for, gone. All those people dead. Sarah Thornton, Michael's family, the 6 other women, all burned alive because they dared stand against Victor. And Thomas was trapped for another year. Another 12 months of slavery while his wife grew bigger with child, while Victor circled closer, waiting to take everything. Despair swallowed him whole. Thomas Brennan, who'd always believed in doing right, discovered the terrible truth. Sometimes right doesn't win. Sometimes evil is too powerful, too entrenched. Sometimes keeping your promises costs you everything and gives you nothing back. He lay on the dirt floor of his shed prison, and for the first time since this began, Thomas Brennan wept. But somewhere in the darkness, a voice, his mother's voice, whispered, "Get up. This isn't over. You're a Brennan. We don't quit." And in the morning when Victor's men came to wake him for another day of labor, they found Thomas standing, bruised, exhausted, but standing, because he'd made a promise to Ayana, made a vow before God and witnesses. And Thomas Brennan kept his promises, even when they killed him, especially then. The marshal arrived at noon the next day. Thomas watched from the stable where he was mucking stalls as Marshal Hawthorne rode up with two deputies, hard men with badges and guns and eyes that had seen too much. Victor greeted them on the porch, all charm and grief. "Marshal, thank God you've come. Terrible tragedy in town. The church burned last night. Several people died. Father Murphy is devastated." Marshal Hawthorne dismounted, his gaze sweeping the estate with professional assessment. "I also heard there were people staying at that church, people who'd been planning to testify about criminal activity. Were they? I wouldn't know. I don't involve myself in church matters." "Course not." The marshal's tone was dry. "Mind if I ask you some questions?" "Not at all. Would you like to come in, Cowboy?" They disappeared into the main house. Thomas kept working, straining to hear anything. An hour later, the marshal emerged, expression unreadable. He rode off without looking at Thomas or anyone else. That night, Michael didn't come to the vent. Or the night after. Or the night after that. Thomas learned why from Naomi. The boy's dead. Found him in the creek. Drowned, they say. But his hands were tied behind his back. Thomas's world tilted. Victor killed him. Victor kills everyone who gets in his way. You should know that by now. But something in Naomi's expression was different. Harder. Like a decision had been made. She leaned close. "My sister Wakanda," she kept a journal. Wrote down everything Victor did to her. Every beating. Every cruelty. I've kept it hidden all these years. I was too afraid to use it. But I'm done being afraid. She pressed something into Thomas's hand, a small leather-bound book. "It's all in there. Names, dates, everything. Give it to the marshal. Make my sister's suffering mean something." Thomas clutched the journal. "Victor will kill you for this." "I'm already dead, have been since my sister died. This way at least I'll die standing up." She walked away before Thomas could respond. The journal felt heavy as stone in his hands, heavy with the weight of a woman's pain, heavy with the cost of truth. But it was also hope. Real evidence from before Victor became untouchable. Evidence he couldn't burn or bury or lie away. Thomas hid the journal in his shed, wrapped in oilcloth and buried in the dirt floor. Then he waited for the right moment, for an opportunity to get it to the marshal. That opportunity came 3 days later when Victor's guards got careless. They'd been drinking, celebrating something. When they came to lock Thomas in for the night, they were stumbling drunk. Thomas waited an hour. Then he dug up the journal, forced open the shed's rotted back wall, and slipped into the night. The estate was quiet. Most of Victor's men were asleep or drunk, or both. Thomas moved like a ghost across the snow, heading for the tree line. He made it 50 yards before the shout went up. "Prisoner escaping south side." Gunfire cracked the night. Thomas ran, legs pumping, lungs burning. Behind him, horses thundered and men yelled. A bullet whined past his head. He crashed into the forest branches, tearing at his face. The journal pressed against his chest. Had to protect it. Had to get it to safety. More gunshots. Closer now. Thomas zigzagged between trees, using every trick he knew from years of hunting in these mountains. Then his foot caught a root, and he went down hard. The journal flew from his hands, landing in the snow 3 feet away. Thomas scrambled for it. Hoofbeats closed in. His fingers closed around the leather binding just as Victor's men burst from the trees. 5 of them on horseback rifles aimed at his chest. "Don't move or we shoot." Thomas stood slowly, the journal clutched against his heart. His breath misted in the cold air. Blood dripped from a cut on his forehead. The lead rider smiled. "You just made a big mistake, Brennan. Running voids your contract. Means we can bring your wife in now. Means everything you sacrificed was for nothing." Thomas looked at the men, at their guns, at the forest surrounding them. No escape, no way out. Then he smiled. Because 50 yards behind the riders, moving silent through the trees, came Marcus Wolfe and 15 other ranchers. Friends, neighbors, good men who'd had enough of Victor Calloway's reign. They emerged from the darkness with rifles raised. Marcus's voice cut through the night. "Drop your weapons, now." Victor's men spun their horses, suddenly surrounded. For a long moment, no one moved. Then one by one, they lowered their guns. Marcus rode forward and extended his hand to Thomas. "Thought you might need some help." Thomas took his hand and pulled himself up behind Marcus's saddle. "How did you know your wife?" She sent word, said if you weren't free by tonight that something had gone wrong, so we came to get you. Ayanna, is she? She's fine, stubborn as hell and mad at the world, but fine. Now let's get you out of here before Victor sends more men. They rode hard through the night, leaving Victor's guards tied to trees. Thomas clutched the journal like a lifeline. Wakanda's words, Wakanda's truth, the key to bringing Victor down. They didn't stop until dawn broke over the eastern peaks, and there, standing on the porch of Thomas's cabin, was Ayanna, 8 months pregnant, fierce and beautiful and waiting. Thomas slid off the horse and ran to her. She met him halfway, and they collided in the snow, holding each other like drowning people finding shore. "You came back," she sobbed against his chest. "I promised. I thought when the church burned, I thought you died. I'm here, I'm alive, and I have evidence. Real evidence that can destroy Victor." Ayanna pulled back to look at him. Thomas was thinner, scarred, exhausted, but his eyes still held that stubborn hope that made her fall in love with him in the first place. "Then we finish this," she said, "together." Thomas kissed her, deep and desperate and full of everything words couldn't hold. Around them, the ranchers stood watch. The sun climbed higher, and in the distance they could hear the sound of horses. Victor's men coming, an army riding to reclaim what he thought he owned. But Thomas Brennan had a wife who believed in him, friends who stood with him, and in his hands evidence that could bring down an empire. The war wasn't over. But for the first time, Thomas believed they could win. The ranchers fortified Thomas's cabin like a fortress. Marcus and his sons boarded windows, stacked hay bales as barriers, positioned men with rifles at strategic points. They had maybe 3 hours before Victor's full force arrived. Thomas sat at the table with Ayanna, the journal open between them. She read Wakanda's words, her face growing paler with each page. "This is worse than I thought. He didn't just hurt her. He systematically destroyed her, made her doubt her own sanity, convinced her she deserved everything he did." Thomas's jaw clenched. "It's the same pattern, the same manipulation he used on you." Ayanna closed the journal carefully. "How do we use this? Victor will just claim it's fabricated, that a bitter wife wrote lies. Not if we get it to federal authorities. This isn't just assault. It documents trafficking, bribery, corruption across territorial lines. That's federal jurisdiction. Victor can't buy his way out of that." Marcus entered, brushing snow from his coat. "We've got maybe 2 hours. My scouts say Victor's gathering every man he has. Could be 40, 50 armed men riding this way. We're 15. The math isn't good." "We don't need to win a battle," Thomas said. "We just need to hold long enough for help to arrive." "What help?" "Marshal Hawthorne. I'm betting he suspected something was wrong with that church fire. If we can get word to him, show him this journal, he'll come. He has to." Marcus shook his head. "Marshall's 3 hours away in Cheyenne at best. Even if we send a rider now, even if he believes us and comes immediately, we're looking at 6 hours minimum. We don't have 6 hours." Ayanna stood abruptly, one hand on her swollen belly. "Then we make Victor come to us on our terms, not his." Both men looked at her. "What are you thinking?" Thomas asked. "Victor wants me, wants this baby. That's what all of this has been about, his obsession with controlling Apache women, with having an heir. So we give him what he wants, or make him think we will." Thomas grabbed her hand. "Absolutely not. You're not using yourself as bait." "I'm not asking permission." Her voice carried steel. "Victor's weakness is his obsession, his need to prove he owns things. We use that. Send him a message. Say I'll turn myself over voluntarily if he drops all claims on you and guarantees safe passage. He'll come personally, won't be able to resist." "And then what?" "We ambush him, murder him." "No." Ayanna's eyes glittered. "Then we trap him, get him talking, get him to confess to everything while witnesses here. Then when the marshal finally arrives, we have testimony and evidence." Marcus stroked his beard. "It's risky, but it might work. Victor's arrogant enough to walk into a trap if he thinks he's already won." Thomas looked at his wife, 8 months pregnant, exhausted, still carrying the scars of Victor's violence. The thought of putting her in danger made his stomach twist. But he also saw the fierce determination in her eyes. This was her fight too, maybe more hers than his. "If we do this," Thomas said slowly, "it has to be airtight. No mistakes. No chances for him to hurt you." He can't hurt me worse than he already has, but he can lose everything, and I want to be there when it happens. They spent the next hour planning. Marcus would send his fastest rider to fetch Marshal Hawthorne with the journal as evidence. Meanwhile, they'd stage Ayana's surrender, set up a meeting with Victor at a neutral location where they could control the environment and have witnesses hidden. The old Miller barn sat 2 miles north of Thomas's cabin. Abandoned for years, it was big enough to hide men, isolated enough that Victor wouldn't suspect a trap, but close enough that reinforcements could arrive quickly if things went wrong. Thomas wrote the message himself: Victor, Ayana Brennan will meet you at Miller Barn at sunset. She'll turn herself over voluntarily. In exchange, you'll release all claims on Thomas Brennan and provide written safe passage for both of us to leave the territory. Come alone, or the deal is void. Signed it, Ayana. They sent one of Marcus's sons to deliver it. The boy rode fast, carrying a white flag to show peaceful intent. While they waited for Victor's response, Ayana suddenly gasped and doubled over. Thomas caught her. What's wrong? Nothing, just the baby kicked. Hard. She straightened, breathing through obvious discomfort. It's been active all morning. Maybe you shouldn't do this. If the baby's coming, the baby's not due for another month. I'm fine. But Thomas saw the tightness around her eyes, saw how she kept one hand pressed to her lower back. Something was wrong. Naomi appeared in the doorway. She'd arrived an hour ago, having fled Victor's estate after giving Thomas the journal. Now she moved to Ayana's side with practiced efficiency. Let me see. She pressed gentle hands to Ayana's belly, feeling the shape and position. Her expression grew concerned. The baby's dropped, lower than it should be at 8 months. What does that mean? Could mean nothing. Could mean labor's starting early. Stress sometimes triggers it. Naomi looked at Thomas. She needs rest, not a confrontation with the man who raped her. I'm not resting, Ayana said through gritted teeth. I'm finishing this. If the baby comes, it comes. But I won't hide while men fight over my body like I'm property to be claimed. Another pain crossed her face, stronger this time. She gripped the table edge until her knuckles went white. Thomas's heart hammered. That's a contraction. You're in labor. I'm not. It's just stress. But even as she spoke, fluid gushed down her legs, soaking her skirt. Her water had broken. Naomi cursed in Apache. The baby's coming now. We need to get her to bed. No, Ayana's voice came fierce. We're going to that barn. We're confronting Victor. Then I'll have this baby. You can't possibly watch me. The fire in her eyes brooked no argument. Thomas recognized that look. Had seen it the night she knocked on his door in the snowstorm. Ayana Stormwind, now Ayana Brennan, was the most stubborn woman alive. And he loved her for it. Marcus's son returned with Victor's response: I accept. Sunset, Miller Barn. I'll come with 5 men for security. You bring the same. We make the exchange and end this civilized. 5 men, not 40. Victor was taking the bait. They had 2 hours until sunset. 2 hours to get into position, hide witnesses, and prepare for whatever came. And Ayana had 2 hours to hold off labor long enough to see this through. They rode to Miller Barn in 2 groups. Marcus, Thomas, Ayana, Naomi, and one other rancher went first. The rest circled wide, hiding in the tree line surrounding the barn with rifles ready. Inside the barn, they positioned themselves carefully. Ayana sat on an old hay bale in the center, visible from the door. Thomas and Marcus hid in the loft above with clear sightlines. Naomi stayed with Ayana, ready to help if labor progressed. The 5th man crouched behind a broken wagon, watching the back entrance. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Ayana had another contraction. Thomas watched from above as she breathed through it, Naomi counting quietly beside her. This is insane, Thomas whispered to Marcus. She's in active labor. The baby could come any minute. Then we better make this quick. The sound of horses carried through the cold air. Victor arrived exactly at sunset, just as promised. But he hadn't brought 5 men. He'd brought 10. They surrounded the barn, taking positions. Victor dismounted and walked to the entrance, calling out, Ayana, I'm here. Are you? I'm here. Victor stepped inside, and Thomas saw the man clearly for the first time in weeks. Still silver-haired, still dressed immaculately. But something had shifted in his bearing. A tension, a desperation poorly hidden. Victor's eyes found Ayana and lit with triumph. There you are. And looking so Maternal, my child suits you. It's not your child. Biology says otherwise. And soon the law will too. He pulled a document from his coat. I've had new papers drawn up, properly legal this time, signed by Judge Morrison and witnessed by the territorial clerk. The moment that baby is born, custody reverts to me as the biological father. Your husband's contract is void. His marriage to you is void. Everything he did was for nothing. Thomas's hands clenched on the rifle. This was the trap within the trap. Victor had never intended to honor any deal, had only come to gloat. Ayanna spoke clearly, voice carrying to every hidden listener. So you're admitting the child is yours, that you fathered it through rape. Victor's smile was ice. Rape is such an ugly word. I prefer to think of it as claiming what was owed. You were under contract. Your body was part of that contract. I took what I paid for. You paid for serving drinks, not my body. The fine print said otherwise, just like it did for Wakanda, just like it does for every woman I've employed. They sign their rights away and then act surprised when I exercise those rights. Ayanna stood another contraction, visibly tightening her features. Wakanda was your wife. You're admitting you raped your own wife. Something dark flickered across Victor's face. Wakanda refused me, said she couldn't bear children, so she wouldn't lie with me anymore, as if her broken body gave her the right to deny her husband. I had to teach her that refusal wasn't an option. By beating her, by forcing yourself on her until she ran back to her tribe to die. Victor's voice rose. She left because she was ungrateful. I gave her everything, a home status protection, and she threw it back in my face because she couldn't give me the one thing I needed, an heir, a son to carry on my name. So you've spent 15 years trying to replace her, targeting Apache women, trying to create the perfect controlled situation where you could breed an heir and keep the mother enslaved. Finally, someone understands. Victor spread his hands. Yes, exactly. Is that so wrong to want to build something that lasts, to want a son? Up in the loft, Thomas squeezed the trigger guard, fighting every instinct that screamed to put a bullet through Victor's skull. But they needed the confession complete, needed everything documented. Ayanna took a step closer to Victor. What about Sarah Thornton, the church fire Michael, and all those people who burned? Victor's expression shifted to practiced innocence. Tragic accident, nothing to do with me. You ordered it, had your men torch the church with everyone on side because they were going to testify against you. Prove it. I don't have to. Ayanna's smile was cold. Because you already did. Every word you've spoken has been heard by 15 witnesses hiding in this barn, including Marshal Hawthorne, who arrived an hour ago with a federal warrant based on evidence from Wakanda's journal. Victor's face drained of color. He spun toward the entrance just as Marshal Hawthorne stepped from behind a stack of hay bales, deputies flanking him. Victor Calloway, you're under arrest for human trafficking, murder, conspiracy, and about a dozen other charges. Turn around and put your hands behind your back. For a moment, Thomas thought Victor might fight, saw his hand twitch toward the gun at his hip. But then the ranchers emerged from their hiding spots, rifles trained on Victor's men outside. 20 guns aimed at 10 men. Victor slowly raised his hands. You think this will stick? We have lawyers, money, influence. I'll be out in a week. Marshal Hawthorne smiled grimly. Not from federal prison, and not with testimony from survivors in a dead woman's journal. You're done, Calloway. As the deputies moved to restrain Victor, he looked at Ayanna with such hatred it was almost physical. You think you've won? You're just another Apache whore playing at being civilized. That baby you're carrying, it'll grow up knowing it came from rape, knowing its mother was nothing but... Thomas dropped from the loft, landing hard and driving his fist into Victor's jaw with every ounce of rage he'd been holding for 3 months. Victor crumpled. Don't you ever speak to my wife again. Marshal Hawthorne grabbed Thomas's arm. That's enough. He's finished. You won. Don't give him the satisfaction of pulling you down to his level. Thomas stepped back, knuckles bleeding. Victor lay in the dirt, blood trickling from his split lip. Broken. Finally broken. Then Ayanna screamed. Everyone turned. She was bent, double hands on her knees, face twisted in agony. Naomi rushed to her side. The baby's coming. Now. Time fractured into chaos. Thomas ran to Ayanna as another contraction seized her. She gripped his arms hard enough to bruise. "It's too fast," Naomi said urgently. "Something's wrong. The baby's coming too fast." They couldn't move her. Not like this. Marcus and the ranchers formed a wall blocking the view, while Naomi and Thomas helped Ayanna to the ground on a blanket someone had spread. Even Marshal Hawthorne turned away, giving them privacy in this most vulnerable moment. Victor, handcuffed and bleeding, laughed from where he lay. "Perfect. The bastard will be born in a barn. How fitting." Thomas ignored him. His entire world had narrowed to Ayanna, her pain, her fear, her strength, as she bore down with each contraction. "I can't do this," she gasped. "Thomas, I can't." "You can. You're the strongest person I know." "I'm scared. What if the baby looks like him? What if every time I see it, I remember?" Thomas cupped her face. "Then we'll love it anyway. Love it so hard and so completely that nothing else matters. Do you hear me? This baby is ours, not his, ours." Another scream, another push. Naomi worked between Ayanna's legs, coaching her through each wave of pain. "I can see the head." "One more big push, Ayanna. One more." Ayanna squeezed Thomas's hand so hard he felt bones grind. She bore down with a sound that was half scream, half sob, and then a thin wail cut through the cold air. "It's a girl," Naomi breathed. "You have a daughter." She lifted the tiny, blood-streaked infant and placed her on Ayanna's chest. The baby, impossibly small, dark hair plastered to her skull, opened her eyes and looked at her mother. Ayanna sobbed, cradling her daughter. Thomas leaned over them both, tears streaming down his face. The baby girl had Ayanna's eyes, Ayanna's nose. Her skin was olive like her mother's, her features unmistakably Apache. If Victor's blood ran in her veins, it showed nowhere in her face. "She's beautiful," Thomas whispered. "She's perfect." Victor's voice came venomous from across the barn. "Let me see it. Let me see my daughter." Thomas stood and walked to where Victor lay, looked down at the man who'd caused so much suffering, who'd taken so much, who'd tried to break them both. "You have no daughter here. This child belongs to Ayanna and me. Your name will never be spoken in her presence. She'll never know you existed. And that's a mercy you don't deserve." Victor lunged against his restraints, face purple with rage. "You can't do that. I have rights, legal rights." Marshal Hawthorne crouched beside him. "Actually, you don't. Territorial law says children born of rape belong to the mother. And you just confessed to rape in front of 20 witnesses. Sign the papers renouncing all parental rights, or I add kidnapping charges to your list." Victor spat at him. "Never. That's my blood, my heir. I'll fight this until what?" The marshal's voice went cold. "Until you're hanged for murder because that church fire killed 6 people. That's multiple counts of murder. Federal crimes. They'll hang you Calloway. And dead men don't have custody rights." The fight drained from Victor's face. He saw it, finally the end he'd built with his own cruelty. No escape, no redemption, just a long drop and a short rope. "Get him out of here," Marshal Hawthorne said. His deputies hauled Victor to his feet and dragged him from the barn. As he passed Ayanna and the baby, Victor tried one last time to look, but Thomas blocked his view. "You're already dead to us." Then Victor was gone, removed from their lives as completely as cutting out rot. In the sudden quiet, Ayanna held her daughter close, whispering Apache words Thomas didn't understand. Naomi worked to deliver the afterbirth and clean them both. Thomas knelt beside his wife. "What are you saying to her?" Ayanna looked up, tears and joy mixing on her face. "I'm telling her she's loved, that she was born into violence but will live in peace, that her father, she met Thomas's eyes, her real father chose her before she was even born." Thomas touched the baby's tiny hand, and she gripped his finger with surprising strength. "What should we name her?" Ayanna thought for a moment. "Wakanda, after the woman whose courage saved us all. And hope, because that's what she represents. Wakanda Hope Brennan." Thomas tested the name. It felt right, felt like a promise kept in a future beginning. Around them, the ranchers began to disperse. Marcus clapped Thomas on the shoulder, said something about being happy for them, but Thomas barely heard. His entire world was the woman and child before him. Marshal Hawthorne approached carefully. I'll need statements from both of you, but it can wait until Mrs. Brennan has recovered. And Thomas, he held out the contract. This is void, has been from the start. Coerced labor is illegal under federal law. You were never bound to Calloway. Thomas took the paper and tore it in half. The sound was satisfying beyond words. What happens to Victor now? Trial, probably in Denver since he's corrupted the local courts. With the evidence we have, the journal, the testimony, his own confession, he'll hang. I'd bet my badge on it. And the women he trafficked, the others still trapped in his businesses. We're shutting everything down. Every saloon, every contract, every operation. The women will be freed, offered passage home, or help starting over. It'll take time, but we'll make it right. Hawthorne tipped his hat and walked away. One by one, the others followed until only Marcus and Naomi remained. Marcus built a small fire to warm the barn. Naomi brought blankets and food. They gave Thomas and Ayanna space to simply be exhausted, relieved, traumatized, joyful. All of it at once. As night fell, baby Wakanda nursed at Ayanna's breast. She was a hungry thing, fierce from her first moments. Thomas watched in wonder as his daughter, because she was his daughter, blood be damned, found her mother's nipple and suckled with determination. I thought I'd feel different, Ayanna said quietly. Thought I'd look at her and see the violence. But all I see is a miracle, a gift I didn't think I deserved. You deserve everything good in this world. I'm starting to believe that. Finally starting to believe it. Thomas leaned over and kissed her forehead. I love you, Ayanna Brennan, and I love our daughter, and I will spend every day of my life proving you both made the right choice, trusting me. Ayanna smiled radiant despite her exhaustion. Ask me now. Ask you what? To say the words, the ones I couldn't say before. Ask me now. Thomas's throat tightened. Do you love me? Yes. Her voice was clear, certain. I love you, Thomas Brennan. Love you for seeing me when I was invisible. For standing up when everyone else looked away. For choosing me and this baby when the whole world said we weren't worth it. I love you with everything I am. Thomas kissed her, then gentle, reverent, tasting salt tears on both their lips. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and clean, covering the ugliness of the day's violence. Inside the barn, a family born of trauma, but forged in love, held each other close. They'd survived. Against impossible odds, they'd survived. And now, finally, they could begin to heal. 3 weeks later, they stood in the Red Creek Church, the same church where they'd married in crisis, now rebuilt from the ashes with help from every rancher in the territory. Father Murphy, scarred but alive, blessed baby Wakanda Hope Brennan while the entire town watched. Some faces were friendly, others remained skeptical. But no one spoke against them. Not after Victor Calloway's trial made territorial headlines. Not after the truth came out about what he'd done. Sarah Thornton was there alive. She'd been out gathering firewood when the fire started, had escaped, and hidden in terror until Marshal Hawthorne found her. Now she stood as Wakanda's godmother, her own trauma visible, but healing. After the ceremony, as they walked back to their cabin, now repaired and expanded with help from Marcus and the others, Ayanna stopped to look out over the valley. Snow still blanketed everything, but spring was coming. They could feel it in the air. A thawing. Do you ever regret it? She asked. Taking me in that first night, everything that came after. Thomas adjusted the bundle that was Wakanda sleeping peacefully against his chest. Not once, not ever. Do you regret knocking on your door? That was the first smart thing I'd done in 2 years. She leaned against him. I thought love was pain, thought it was control and ownership and violence. You taught me different. Taught me it could be choice, partnership, safety. We taught each other. They walked the rest of the way in comfortable silence. At the cabin, Marcus and his family waited with dinner prepared. Naomi was there too, having left Victor's estate forever and found work with a kind widow in town. The house filled with laughter and warmth and the sound of community. As Thomas put Wakanda to bed in the cradle he'd built with his own hands, he thought about his mother, about her promise that had shaped his life, about how she'd been right. He would know when he found the right person because she'd scare him, because she'd ask him to become someone new. Ayanna had done exactly that, had taken the lonely rancher who hid behind old vows and turned him into a husband, a father. A man brave enough to fight for what mattered. Thomas traced his daughter's tiny face, this child born from violence, but claimed by love. She would never know the darkness of her beginning, would only know that two broken people chose to heal together and built her a world where she was safe, wanted, cherished. Ayana appeared in the doorway, backlit by firelight. She asleep. Finally. Come to bed. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. Why's that? Because we're planting the spring crops. Building a bigger barn, living our lives like normal people. She smiled. Isn't that what we fought for? The chance to be boring. Thomas laughed. I don't think we'll ever be boring. He followed his wife to their bedroom. Outside, the wind still carried winter's bite, but spring was coming, and with it, everything they'd nearly died to protect. That night, as Thomas lay beside Ayana with their daughter sleeping nearby, he whispered a final prayer to his mother. I kept your promise, found someone worthy, someone who makes me better. Thank you for making me wait. It was worth it. God, it was worth everything. In the darkness, Ayana's hand found his, squeezed once, a language they'd built between them that needed no words. They'd survived the storm. Now they would learn to live in the light. And as Thomas drifted towards sleep, he realized something profound. He'd spent 32 years afraid of breaking his mother's promise. But in the end, breaking it, choosing Ayana, choosing love, choosing to become someone new, was the truest way he could have honored it. Because his mother hadn't made him promise to wait for perfection. She'd made him promise to wait for transformation, for someone who'd change him, challenge him, make him rise to meet them. Ayana Stormwind had done all that and more. And together they'd built something neither could have built alone. A marriage, a family, a future worth fighting for. Outside, snow fell soft and silent. Inside, three hearts beat in rhythm, safe, warm, and finally home. The story of Thomas and Ayana Brennan was just beginning, but the hardest chapters were behind them. What lay ahead was simply the beautiful, ordinary work of living, of loving, of raising a daughter who would grow up knowing that even the darkest beginnings could lead to the brightest futures. And that was more than enough. That was everything. Summer 1897 painted the Wyoming high country in shades of gold and green. Thomas Brennan stood on his expanded porch, the same porch where a dying woman had collapsed in the snow a decade ago, and watched his daughter race through wheat fields that hadn't existed back then. Wakanda Hope was 10 now. Long black hair flying behind her as she chased her younger siblings, two boys and a girl, all born in the years after Victor's hanging. Her laugh carried on the wind, bright and untroubled, the sound of a child who'd never known fear. She had no memory of the barn where she was born, no knowledge of the violence that preceded her first breath. To Wakanda, Thomas Brennan was simply Papa, the man who taught her to ride, who told her stories by the fire, who looked at her with nothing but fierce, unconditional love. Arms wrapped around Thomas from behind. Ayana, older now, silver threading through her black hair, but still strong, still fierce. What are you thinking about? Her voice held the warmth of 1,000 shared mornings. About promises, Thomas said quietly, and how breaking the right one saved my life. Ayana moved to stand beside him, their shoulders touching in the way of people who'd learned each other's rhythms over years. Your mother would be proud. You waited, just not for what you thought you were waiting for. Thomas watched Wakanda boost her youngest brother onto her shoulders. The boy shrieked with delight. In town, the Brennan children were simply the Brennan children, accepted if not universally loved, then at least no longer scorned. Time and Thomas's stubbornness had worn down most prejudice. She asked me yesterday, Ayana said softly. Wakanda asked why her skin was darker than her brother's, why some kids in town whisper. Thomas's jaw tightened. What did you tell her? The truth, that she's Apache through me, that she's Irish through you. That blood doesn't determine family choice does. Ayana's hand found his. And I told her about a man who chose her before he ever met her, who stood on this porch and told the world she was his, and damn anyone who said different. What did she say? Ayana smiled. She said, good. I wouldn't want any other papa anyway. The words settled into Thomas like roots finding soil. 42 years old now, his hands more scarred, his face more weathered. But standing here with his wife and children, he felt younger than he had at 32, alive in a way that loneliness had never allowed. Do you ever think about that night, Ayana asked. Wonder what would have happened if you'd left the door closed. Every day. Thomas pulled her closer. And every day, I'm grateful I didn't. Even though it cost you so much the year with Victor. The scars, the prejudice we still face. Especially because of that, easy things don't change you. You don't discover who you really are when life is comfortable. He turned to face her fully. That night in the storm, I was half dead inside and didn't know it. You didn't just need saving. We both did. Ayana's eyes glistened. Ask me again. Thomas smiled. He knew what she meant. After 10 years, they had rituals. Do you love me, Ayana Brennan? Yes. No hesitation. Never hesitation anymore. I love you more than I did yesterday. Less than I will tomorrow. That's how it works when you build something real. From the fields, Wakanda called out, Mama, Papa, come see what we found. Thomas and Ayana walked down from the porch hand in hand toward their children, toward the life they'd built from ashes and determination. Around them, the wheat swayed in the summer breeze. Mountains stood eternal on the horizon. The sky stretched endless and blue. This was what his mother had wanted for him. Not perfection, not ease, but this a life fully lived. Love hard won and fiercely kept. A family forged in fire and tempered by choice. Thomas Brennan had spent 32 years keeping a promise he didn't understand. Then he'd broken it for a woman dying in a snowstorm and discovered that sometimes the best way to honor a promise is to know when to let it go. That night, after the children were asleep and the cabin finally quiet, Thomas lay beside Ayana in the darkness. Her breathing had slowed towards sleep, but he was still awake thinking, Ayana, thank you for knocking on my door. She rolled over to face him, eyes glinting in the moonlight through the window. Thank you for opening it. I do it again, every time, in every version of this life. I know. She kissed him softly. That's why I love you. Outside, an owl called into the summer night. Inside, two people who'd saved each other held on still. Grateful, still healing, still choosing each other with every breath. The storm had passed long ago. But what they'd built in its wake would stand forever.